Hello grade 6 teachers. In this video we're going to have a look at the computer science curriculum for grade 6. Before we jump into the curriculum, let's have a look at some of the why it's a great thing that computer science is now a part of our Alberta curriculum, and all students from kindergarten through grade 6 will be learning computer science and coding skills. 10 years ago, big software companies like Facebook, YouTube, Microsoft started to recognize that there was going to be a huge shortage of programmers in the industry. At that time in 2013, they published stats like these, predicting that there would be 1 million empty jobs in 10 years' time because there weren't enough students going into computer programming to match the demand for programmers needed in the industries. Fast forward to today, which is 10 years past these stats, and while we don't have 1 million empty jobs in computer programming, there are still 500,000 unfilled programming jobs out in the technology industry, and this has impacts in every single field. So even if students don't end up inspired to choose a career in the computer sciences specifically, the coding skills that they're going to learn from kindergarten through grade 6 are going to give them enough coding knowledge to give them advantages in other career areas as well. Coding is impacting literally every industry, and if we give our students those foundational coding skills, we are going to give them access to better jobs, and they're going to get jobs over other candidates who don't have those same skills. So we know that this is really important, and it has been already for a decade. And now we have our curriculum coming in line with this demand, whereas a lot of teachers have been incorporating STEM and coding into your elementary classrooms already without it even being part of the curriculum. So that is a great thing that's happening here in Alberta. You're likely already familiar with the organizational structure of the new curriculum. Science is organized the same way, where we have organizing ideas at the top level that are consistent from kindergarten through grade 6. And then inside of those, we have our knowledge, our understanding, skills, and procedures that show the more specific information per grade level that students are expected to understand and things they are able to do. So computer science is one of these big organizing ideas that goes all the way from kindergarten through grade 6. And there's a lot of knowledge, understandings, and skills and procedures that students are expected to have already by the time they get to grade 6. So there's certainly going to be some gap bridging for grade 6 teachers rolling out the computer science curriculum. So that's whether you're optionally implementing right now, or this is going to be coming out for you next year with the full provincial rollout. Just being cognizant of where the students have not been, that they maybe will be expected to achieve your curriculum. There's going to be some of those things that you're going to have to go back and do. The nice piece is that most of it is very easy, and you should find that you're able to bridge those gaps and get your students into the grade 6 curriculum without too much extra work. So when we look at the organizing idea for computer science, it says that problem solving and scientific inquiry are developed through the knowledgeable application of creativity, design, and computational thinking. So we're really asking students to be thinkers in many ways. When we talk about creativity in science, I like to focus in on these 4 specific points of originality, risk-taking, imagination, and flexibility. So really in science, we're just encouraging students to take chances, to be imaginative and think of new ways to solve old problems, or new ways to reach an outcome that might be more efficient, might work better, or may solve a problem better. The design thinking process is not something new. This may be the first time we're seeing it actually explicitly put into curriculum, and it certainly doesn't only apply to computer science. So this is one of the pieces that you have the opportunity to cover throughout your other science topics as well as your other subject areas within your class. Design thinking is a big model. Learning how to work through certain pieces of this can be really difficult for students. So any opportunities that you have to make connections into design thinking, whether it be a whole project model following the process or even just different pieces of the design thinking process as you're doing them in your other subject areas, that's going to give your students a good understanding of design thinking and then that key piece of the computer science organizing idea. There are lots of resources online for teaching design thinking to students and introducing them to the concepts in the process. This is a video from Sesame Street on empathy. That's a fun way to introduce what that is to your students. I also have a sample activity that I've done with many grade 6 classes. Through my time working with Wetaskiwin Regional, I had an opportunity for a number of years to go out and do robotics camps for 3 days with all of the grade 6 classes in our division. And we always kicked off robotics camp by learning a bit about the design process, and we would do this activity as an opener. So prior to showing students the video that is going to be coming up shortly, we would have a talk about the design process, just look at that sort of overall visual of what the design process is, and then jumping into this first step, which is empathizing. So I tell them that they're going to be asked to design something for someone, and I'm going to show a video of this person. And during the video, you're going to learn about this person, not only the story and how this person has gotten to where they are, but also through the things that she says, we're going to learn things about her. And these things that we learn are going to help us create something for her, or I should say just design something for her. So I'd ask students that as they watch the video to really pay attention to how they're feeling and think about how the video makes them feel, and to think about what it would be like to be in this person's shoes. So once we have that framed up, we go ahead and watch the video. I'm going to play it now. It's about 7 minutes or so long. If you've seen it before and are already familiar, or you just want to save some time, you can go ahead and skip through that, and let's go ahead and meet our audience.
You're deaf?
Yes, I lost all my hearing when I was 18 years old.
Wow. And how old are you now?
29, so it's 10 years.
Wow. And Mandy, how did you lose your hearing, if you don't mind me asking?
I have a connective tissue disorder, so basically I got sick and my nerves deteriorated. Growing up, the only thing I wanted to do was sing. I ended up going to school for vocal music education so that I could have that be my life. When I was in college, I thought I had an ear infection, and it just got worse and worse. And by Christmas, I was borderline legally deaf in both ears. There was one day where the teacher was going to play the piano, and I had to chart out everything that he was playing. And I had my pencil ready, and everybody else's pencils start moving, and I'm just waiting for the test to start. And then one by one, every person just got up and left the room. And I didn't hear enough to even start the test. That was the last day I was a part of music program. That was a bad day.
When we're sitting in the car together to come home, she said, "Dad, I can't remember what your voice sounds like anymore." At that moment, you knew that things would never be the same.
Everything that I had ever wanted was just going away, and I couldn't stop it.
The music is alive inside of her. The only question was, what could she do with it now?
My dad suggested that we play a song. I said, well, that's crazy. But I had a guitar tuner and I hummed my starting note and just went for it. Music now isn't about the sound, it's about the feeling. I'm excited, I'm nervous, I'm scared, so I'm just trying to... It's not the dream that I always had. That's okay, because I showed up and I did something I never believed I could do.
So, you were singing before you lost your hearing?
Yeah, I've been singing since I was 4. So I left music after I lost my hearing and then figured out how to get back into singing with muscle memory, using visual tuners and trusting my pitch.
So your shoes are off because you're feeling the vibration. Is that how you're following the music?
Yeah, I'm feeling the tempo, the beat through the floor.
And Mandy, what are you going to sing?
I'm gonna sing a song that I wrote called Try.
Okay, can you tell me what it's about?
After I lost my hearing, I gave up. But I want to do more with my life than just give up. So...
Good for you. Good for you. Okay, well, look, this is your moment, and good luck.
Okay.
Mandy, I don't think you're going to need a translator for this. It's incredible. I mean, I've done this a long time. That was one of the most amazing things I've ever seen and heard. Come here. Thank you so much. For you. That was amazing. Amazing. Congratulations, guys.
And if you are a big softie like me, this is the point that you can have a conversation with your students about how those things that might be coming down our faces are physical forms of empathy. If you feel anything while you're watching the video about Mandy, that is what empathy is. If you feel sadness for her and her troubles, if you feel celebratory at the end when she gets the golden buzzer, those feelings are what empathy is. And some of us are very empathic naturally, and those are the people who have those tears streaming down their face. And some people aren't as naturally empathetic, but that doesn't mean that we can't all think about what it's like to be in someone else's shoes and consider what it might be like to be in that person's situation. So, like I say, a great way to just physically show what empathy is. There's lots of emotions happening in that video, and they're using music and things to bring that out even more. I've had lots of success using that with students. Following the video, we'd have a conversation. I've always done this as a whole class activity because we were just introducing the design process as well as the concept of empathy and how that relates to the design process. So we would have a class conversation about what is Mandy's problem. Of course, right off the top, the students will come that her problem is being deaf. However, I tell them that that is not Mandy's problem because she has already solved and is able to sing even though she is deaf. And medically, they aren't able to heal her at this point in time. But now, what else do you see as a problem for Mandy? And it'll take some prompting for your students possibly to get to this space where we determine that Mandy has to sing in her socks and we think she should be able to wear shoes on stage. So I challenge the students to think of a way that Mandy can wear shoes and still be able to perform and sing on stage, and then have them get into their small groups to do some brainstorming and come up with some ideas, finally land on some designs that they're happy to turn in as, their prototype design for what they would come up with for Mandy. Over the many years that I did this with our grade 6 classes with a wide demographic of students, I saw so many fantastic ideas, and some of them would be super high-tech things that probably aren't even technically possible with what we have today. Easy tech options that for sure could be created today. And then even no tech options, such as a pair of shoes that has no soles or has holes in the soles so that Mandy could still feel those vibrations. So the students came up with incredible ideas. I often plowed through this lesson in about a half an hour. So they weren't given tons of time because this really was just about getting creative thinking going, getting them comfortable with taking some chances, and then understanding how empathy, learning about and understanding our audience is how an inventor can create things for other people. So again, there are lots of videos and resources out there online. There's a YouTube channel called Crash Course Kids that has a series of videos on design thinking that are just excellent for upper elementary. If you want to work through more of the design thinking process specifically with your students, you have lots of opportunities to incorporate brainstorming. Again, we'll have students working this when they're doing the design thinking process, but we also do brainstorming in other areas. So anytime we're doing a brainstorming activity, just making that connection into, hey, this is a piece of the design thinking process. We're doing some design thinking right now, is a way to help with that extra connection to design thinking. And then you're going to be working that computer science curriculum into those other topic areas as well. We also have plenty of opportunities for the final piece, which is that prototyping and testing. And this is where students will struggle in that this isn't really a linear process like we see here. In fact, we know that at the end of the design thinking process, we often end up in a reiteration loop where we're going back to our design and refining or fine-tuning. Sometimes we may even be scrapping our whole design and going back into our ideas that we brainstormed and starting with one of those from scratch because our ultimate goal wasn't met with our final product. Students aren't readily able to accept failure. So this is a piece with the design thinking and doing some STEM challenges, specifically where there might be some intent to have failure and students have to figure out how to look at the failures and assess it, determine what went wrong, and then go back and actually make those changes. And you can have students, fixing up a piece of writing, and they would be learning these concepts as well, and then making that connection for them. Well, let's apply design thinking here. Like, this is a really good piece of writing, but if I gave you some tips and tricks, it could be an even better piece of writing or project for one of your other subjects. Just giving students lots of opportunities to go back and refine is going to help with those skills and make them really good problem solvers and critical thinkers for when they are working with computer coding, because computer coding rarely works out the way we expect it to. There's a lot of going back and working through debugging, and this all connects into this piece of the design process. Computational thinking, that's the next big idea in the organizing idea for computer science. So let's break computational thinking down. This is one of those gaps that you're going to be bridging some. Your grade 6s may not be familiar with computational thinking and the different parts of it. You do have a whole bunch in your skills and procedures around abstraction in this process. So your students are going to need to know some foundational knowledge in computational thinking before they can start to really deep dive into abstraction like is expected of them. So let's look at this process. If we bring something for the students when we're first going to introduce computational thinking, we want to introduce it with something that they're already really familiar with. And so we're going to use a concrete example of a sandwich to just break this down. And you could do this activity with your students as well. So I tell students we're going to be coming up with a set of instructions that someone who has no idea what a sandwich is could follow, and at the end they would come out with a sandwich without knowing what it is that they're supposed to be making from the get-go. And we could say that we want these instructions to be so specific that they could even be followed by a machine. And we're going to be hitting computer science outcomes and also using computational thinking connected to something that's completely non-tech related. So if we think about a sandwich and start to ask, like, what goes into a sandwich? Like what let's break it down into all of its parts. So that's the decomposition piece. To build something or put something together, we first need to understand what all the parts of it are. So think about your favorite sandwich that you would want to make and start decomposing that and putting down what are all of the things that go into it. And this isn't just referring to ingredients. This also will refer to steps or pieces of the instructions that are going to come into our sandwich making algorithm that we're going to build at the end of this all. So once we've decomposed our sandwich, our problem, our outcome or end goal, we can start to look for some patterns in all of those pieces. So we've pulled all of the pieces apart. Now we want to start to look for some similarities and differences. Is there a way that we can group up all of the parts of sandwich making to simplify things and make them a little bit easier to understand? Let's start looking for ingredients that we have to do the same processes with. are there things that need to be sliced in this example? Some things need to be washed, and some things need to be sliced and washed. And perhaps we've got a third circle here where we're talking about items that need to be opened before we can use them, or spread. Really, depending on the type of sandwich we've chosen, this could go in many different directions. Pattern abstraction. This is, as I say, something in grade 6 that students are expected to understand what abstraction is. So the first piece of abstraction is starting to build towards generalization. So in the previous slide, we asked students to, divide their ingredients into the steps that would be taken to prep those ingredients for a sandwich. We could ask students, are there other foods that would go into these groups? And are there foods that would go into these groups that need to be sliced and washed, or both, that maybe wouldn't go in a sandwich, but if you were giving instructions for something else, you could use that same general instruction, wash then slice. Could that be applied in other situations? Let's think of some other foods that instruction might be useful for. So now we're making connections into something outside, and then working towards that ultimate end goal is, what is an abstraction? It's taking something complicated and breaking it down into its most simple form, getting rid of all of the extra information and making really general, basic information available out of a larger amount of information. So if we were to take now, after having made the connection to what are the similarities and differences, how can we group these, moving into what other things would fit in these groups, and now moving to, do you think there's other foods we could make that we could use the same or very similar set of instructions? Is there a way to break those instructions down so simply that they could be applied across the board, no matter what food it is that we're building together that has many ingredients in it? So now we're thinking about what could those very general statements be in our instructions to make it the most simple. Just pulling up now the last piece with the algorithm design. This is what connects directly into computer coding. Computer coding is writing algorithms in a language that computers understand. Algorithms are simply a set of instructions. So this is our algorithm for building a sandwich. Now, obviously, this is probably not cover it comprehensively enough. This wouldn't be a good enough set of instructions for someone who doesn't know a sandwich. But with your students, again, either as a whole class, especially when we're doing this for the first time, or in small groups, having them collaborate to create those algorithms. You're actually going to be meeting some of the computer science content from grades 3 and 4 and 5, as well as giving your students a really good understanding of what computational thinking is and getting them practicing those abstraction skills that they are expected to do in grade 6. I like to share these posters with teachers that show the different parts of a scientist, and some of these are super applicable to computer science specifically, in particular a curious mind and a strong heart. When we're encouraging students to use computational thinking to get that specific and break something down, or to use the design thinking process and work through multiple iterations of something, we're asking them to take chances and to be brave and to always be critically and creatively thinking. I have a few different versions to suit your classroom style. So please feel free to take those and use them as you like. Looking further into our outcomes specifically. So we have that big organizing idea for the kindergarten through grade 6 that's the same for every grade. And then at each grade level, we have some more specific information in the learning outcome that lives there up at the top above that knowledge, understanding, skills, and procedures. So this is just an at a glance of what those outcomes all the way up to grade 6 look like. As I mentioned earlier about bridging gaps, that's a biggest job for you grade 6 teachers. But if you have a glance at this and notice how much it talks about just instructions and using creativity in the lower elementary grades, you'll find that you should be able to bridge those gaps fairly quickly by just making some connections to classroom routines and drawing students' attention to what algorithmic thinking is, as far as it just relates to instructions that we follow at school. I start even in kindergarten connecting algorithms for students to sets of instructions that we follow at school. So I tell students that machines and computers understand something called algorithms. Algorithms are sets of instructions. And in fact, you all know some algorithms that your teachers have taught you this year. For example, what happens if you hear the fire bell ringing? And guaranteed your students can tell you the steps that they take. That right there is a perfect example of an algorithm. We have an event, the fire bell ringing. We have a set of steps that we've been programmed to do when the fire bell rings, so that when the fire bell rings, we complete those steps without any further instructions or anybody needing to tell us what we're supposed to do. That is exactly what we're doing when we program computers and robots. So you have the opportunity just within your classroom procedures to use a bit of language. Hey, grade sixes, what's the algorithm for recess time? They give you back the instructions, and you're going to quickly cover what they're expected to know in the lower grades. Give them the foundational skills for actually building some block-based programming to create a computational artifact. There are a couple of computer coding terms that do come up in the lower grades. Starting in grade 2, students are asked to do debugging. At that point in time, it's not being connected at all to computer programming specifically, unless a teacher's choosing to do it that way. It really just means going and finding an error in a set of instructions. So this can even be showing your work in math. You got the wrong answer and being able to go back and find out where you made your mistake. That by telling students they're debugging, again, you're going to make the connection into the computer coding language, connect that computer science concept into something that they understand very well, and should easily be able to teach your students about debugging, again, before they're building computational artifacts with code. You can use this following set of slides and lesson to teach your students everything they need about coding to start actually programming in a block-based language. Coding consists of many languages that computers understand. We have the ability as students to use block-based coding, which is a really easy way to build algorithms that some different software programs understand. Knowing that different computers have different languages, and with the advent of artificial intelligence, knowing just how algorithms work and how to explain an algorithm in just the plain old English language that you know is going to give you the ability to do computer programming in the future, because computers are actually able to translate your regular language into the computer language for you. And we know that there is computer coding in almost everything we touch in our daily lives. All of our appliances have become smart. Our TVs have computers in them. Even our cars have computer systems. So in all of the factories that make these things, there are computer engineers, software coders doing that electronic piece. And beyond our everyday items that we're using, there's a whole world of robots out there in the world working, completing tasks, making things easier for humans, or giving data on what is happening, and just completing things efficiently, more efficiently than humans, or doing things that humans even couldn't have done prior to robots. Always remembering that these robots, whether it's milking a cow or doing surgery with the hands of a skilled real surgeon, only exist out of the minds of the programmers who created the programming that goes into them. Knowing how to do computer programming means that you can manipulate and control robots, electronics, and of course, the World Wide Web and everything that we see on personal devices like computers and tablets and phones as well. We might think that computer coding is a whole bunch of binary numbers made very complicated and that you need to be incredibly intelligent in math to do it. That is not the case. Computer coding is actually very simple, especially because we have all of these programs and languages that convert into that complicated computer programming like we saw on the last slide. This is some sample of computer science vocabulary. If your grade sixes have a good understanding of these 6 terms, they have a good understanding of a lot of the computer science knowledge that is contained in the grades from kindergarten up through grade 5. So we're going to just learn some of this right now to show you how quickly you can get your students up to speed on the basics of computer programming and then get them into doing some block-based coding. So coding really is just a set of instructions. As I've been saying, instructions can be given in many different ways. They might be out loud. We might have verbal or visual cues. It could be sound like the fire bell that we talked about earlier. But just having students understand, asking them to order these cards in the correct order would be meeting outcomes from kindergarten up through grade 3 regarding ordering instructions in the proper order and understanding that the order makes a difference. And all of that knowledge and content really just is around instructions. They have to be followed in order. Sometimes repeating can make them more efficient. And now we're ready to do some programming. You can teach your students using this fun activity where you tell them you're going to turn them into your little robots, and you're going to give them a language, and it's a very simple language, and then you're going to give them some algorithms to run, and we're going to just practice running algorithms as my little robots to show them how easily this can be done. So then we'll talk about how an event is when I say start and point at you, and make sure you don't run your algorithm before I do that. Here's your language. When you see an R, stomp your right foot. When you see an L, stomp your left foot. And if you see an H, clap your hands. Let's put one algorithm, or let's talk about how when we put steps together, this is an algorithm. So you're going to see a combination of these letters come up on our projector smartboard. There might be 2 of them, there might be 3 of them. You look at them, make sure you don't start until I've given you the start command. And that's how you're going to be my robots. So once we've covered this terminology, we've gone over event, we've gone over the pieces of the language. Now we can go ahead and pop our first algorithm up. You might find that your students forget to wait for start, and you'll have to remind them. And then we'll practice another with just 2 steps in our algorithm. Let's make it more complicated and have 3 steps in our algorithm. Again, always making sure we wait for teacher to say start. Now I can teach you what a loop is. When you see this symbol around our algorithm, this is telling us that we're going to do whatever's inside more than one time. If it has a number on it like this, we're going to do it that many times. So in this case, we would do this 3 times. Let's practice. Start. And then when we see forever, this means we would complete this algorithm forever or until something tells us to stop. And for you guys, we're going to use stop. A big stop button will come up. Otherwise, you're going to complete that algorithm forever. All right, let's go ahead and see if you guys understand what a forever loop is. Pull my algorithm up, tell them to start. Break out into We Will Rock You when they get in sync with each other if you choose. And then, stop them once they have gotten, obviously, the concept. So a really quick and easy way for you to introduce your students to the basics of algorithms and loops with making a little bit of noise and disturbing the classes next door. And that'll get them as I said, many of the skills from that kindergarten and up through grade 2, that's just around putting instructions together and understanding that we have, algorithms that happen in a certain order, and that sometimes we use something like a loop or repetition to make it more concise, and that is that abstraction piece right there. You can connect this algorithm design into anything where we're working in grid space. So there's lots of worksheet type activities and online digital games and activities where we're moving things on a grid space using an algorithms made of arrows. So you can use checkerboards and small toys with some laminated cards with arrows on them. We could be putting something up for projection for the students and just having them sketch those algorithms down on a piece of paper in a notebook. Any practicing just putting those steps in order, recognizing that there might be different paths to get to the same place, and all of that is going to again, bridge the gaps from the computer science from the lower grades. You can ask students to come up with instructions for things they're doing in their other subjects, like math equations. You could give them samples like we see here where there has been a mistake made and asking them to find that mistake and explain it. And now they would be doing some debugging while they're also practicing their math skills. So getting a little bit closer up with your curriculum, we have two sets of understanding, or two understandings in the grade 6 computer science. So the first one has a lot of knowledge with it, and I've highlighted just some key words here to show, as I've already mentioned, that abstraction is a big thing that grade 6s are expected to understand and to be able to show that they know. So we have lots of knowledge here around abstraction, and notice that it says it includes these things, but we aren't expecting students necessarily to have the knowledge of everything that's in this list, but it's just giving you lots of choice so that you can make those connections for your students as they are appropriate, and just really understanding that abstraction makes life simpler. I've highlighted computational artifacts. So in grade 4 and 5, the students are being asked to create artifacts. In grade 6, you're seeing that they're being asked to create specifically computational artifacts. Just keeping in mind that that doesn't still mean that it has to be a computer program or something that's built with code, that audio video presentations, slideshows, websites, and things like that would qualify as computational artifacts as well. So you've got chances again to have students working with this knowledge in other subject areas by creating a slides presentation about a certain topic in social studies. You're going to be doing social studies at the same time as some computer science. So the understanding about abstraction is that it is used in design and coding of computational artifacts to make problems easier to think about. So abstraction is used in coding and computational artifacts to make things simpler and easier to understand. And we'll look at some really specific examples of that a little bit further along. So then in this understanding, we have these 4 skills and procedures, where the first 2 talk specifically just about abstractions, and you're going to want to focus on those specifically and make lots of connections to them wherever you can throughout your other classroom lessons. Anytime we're seeing abstractions, just bringing their attention to it, asking them if they recognize it. Where do you see abstraction in this lesson we're doing? You're going to be helping them with these skills and procedures. And then we have discussing the role of design and coding in society. Again, lots of opportunities to make these connections as you're learning about things in your science systems. And you may be looking at, how we produce power differently, or looking at alternative ways of producing electricity, and how did that happen? Why did scientists determine we need to look for these other ways of making electricity? We'd be talking about the role of design to some degree, and then we can always roll in how computer systems are coming into everything. So if we compare off something pre-computer and post-computer, and what are the advantages of having computers involved in farming, for example. We would be discussing the role of design and technology. And then you do have this one specific skill that's saying that students are going to use a visual block-based language to design code that includes relevant design structures. So essentially, they're going to take a program like Scratch, they're going to take something like a microbit, and they are going to independently create a line of code or a script or some code that makes that sprite, that microbit, that other robot do something. So just the one specifically computer coding, lots about abstraction in this one. And then moving into the other understanding, this is really about the impacts of technology and computers and coding on society, the different types of impacts they can have. So I think you're going to likely be looking at some types of research-based projects. And while you're working on these things, again, they could be making, computational artifacts, so they would be hitting the other knowledge as well. The understanding with this understanding is computers, coding, and technology can be used in ways that have positive or negative impacts. So that's really wide open. We're going to border on, the idea that technology can be scary. We want to balance that with that technology, advances and changes our world and makes things possible that were never possible before. And probably, again, needs to be covered explicitly. Again, it's some type of a research project or doing some writing, but then can also be connected into what your other learning. So anytime you have the opportunity to look at how technology has changed things, this could be, like I say, in math, lots of your other science topics. This will give you a chance to work on these skills and procedures, make lots of connections for students so that they can be successful with these as well. Now let's have a close-up look at abstraction specifically. So your students are asked to find examples of abstraction in daily life and to be able to abstract information themselves. Here we see just a small sampling of what we could actually make connections to as far as real life examples of abstraction. Maps abstract the geographical features of a region, such as roads and rivers and landmarks, to provide a simplified representation that helps us to navigate and understand the area. Cooking recipes take complicated foods and break them down to simple instructions so that we can make something amazing following just a simple set of steps. Music notation is an example of abstraction, how it's taking complicated musical compositions into just a basic set of notes and symbols that, when played together, create this amazing music. Computer programming, of course, lots of abstraction there. This is where, we use loops to make things simpler. We break things down into their general, most simple steps. Even just the English language and phonic awareness and understanding how different pieces of different letters and groups of letters go together to create words is an abstraction. We've taken something very complicated and it's been broken down into simple symbols. Lots of examples of abstraction. You can Google, use some AI like ChatGPT to generate a list of abstractions. Give your students as many opportunities as you can to make those connections. Just draw your attention in. Hey, look at this. Math symbols, those are abstractions. The plus sign, it means more than that, right? But we all know what that means. It's a very simple symbol meant to represent something more complicated. So anytime you can make those connections, you're going to be working those computer science skills while you're doing the other skills as well. Looking specifically at discussing the role of first design and then coding, because I've separated them out because they're clearly different things. So again, there's a million ways that we could look at how design thinking process and how people have used design thinking to better improve anything in our lives. Everything from website user interfaces. When app developers are creating an app that's meant to be used on our mobile device, they're giving a lot of thought to what the design is, in that users will find it user friendly, it'll be pleasing to look at, and all of those things. Graphic designers create visual content for all kinds of different purposes. Fashion designers, since the dawn of time, have used design thinking to, consider what is functional and what looks good. And architects use design thinking to create buildings that meet their purposes, but then are also aesthetically pleasing. So again, anytime you can just draw students' attention to something that you're talking about in one of your other subjects, or something that's coming up as a class discussion, and making that connection into, hey, wow, some designers really spent some time creatively thinking about this. It's just gonna get students discussing the role of design in society. And then you also have, plenty of opportunities to discuss the role of coding in society. So anything that's been, computerized or roboticized has coding involved. How is putting robots into a car manufacturing plant making life better? What do you think the impacts were when that happened? And we can talk about how, maybe robots are more consistent than humans. They'll complete something exactly the same every time, where a human might have a slight difference in how they're completing something time and time again. And we can also, of course, bring in the other piece about discussing how computers, coding, and technology have had impacts when we're talking about the role of coding in society as well. Again, I said it earlier on, technology touches almost everything that we touch. So any chances you have to say, hey, you know how coding's changed my life? I used to write grades down, in a book and manually total them up with a calculator. Whoa, what do you think it was like for teachers before calculators? And now today I get to use a computer and someone's written code that figures this all out for me. And it not only does that, it actually puts it out there so your parents can see too. Look at how technology and coding have changed, say, just what a teacher does. And there's, again, a million examples. This doesn't have to be just a unit where we maybe write a paper on the role of coding and design in society, but these can be ongoing classroom discussions. Anytime you have a chance to point out and say, hey, look at how this has been changed by technology, and have that discussion with your class, you're going to be meeting this skill and procedure and giving them a much better understanding of it, because you're making those connections to the things that they're familiar with and the other things that they're learning about. The final skill and procedure around this more abstract stuff is about predicting the possible impacts of computers, coding, or technology in the future. I've just come up with some examples here for ways that you could do this in some of your other subject areas. So again, this could be a very black and white. Students, tell me what you think it's going to be like in the future. We could, though, do some project-based learning connected into some of the things that you're doing in your other subjects. So asking them to create, a picture or a painting or a 3D model of what a future world might look like. Asking them to show you what they think communication might look like in the future, or to research some technology concepts and concept models. What are some things out there that companies are saying they might make someday, and which ones of those do you think might actually exist, and why do you think those might actually exist? And you could even have students working in, health and wellness, and looking at advances in medical technology and evaluating that, and thinking and imagining what might change in the future based on what we can see today. So I think there's opportunities to, again, sort of thread this through your other subject areas, talk with students about it a lot, encourage them to use their imaginations, and just, dream about how coding and technology can have further impacts in the future. And I think the purpose of this is just to get kids excited and interested in learning about computer science and coding and programming, because it's going to give them the ability to create that future that they can envision or imagine. So you do have the use of visual block-based language to design code. So your students are expected to use some block-based coding. I want to draw your attention to the skills and procedures from grade 5 here. So in grade 5 is when students are really expected to start learning about block-based coding. So this may be one of those gaps that you need to bridge with your students. Whether your students have been on a coding platform before or not, they're all really user-friendly. They come, most of them, with built-in tutorials that your students can do. There's a bunch of Scratch cards that have been around as long as the Scratch interface has, so 10 years or more. They aren't all up to date with what the current interface looks like. So I had spent some time creating those cards using the newest blocks that are in Scratch, just so that they match what the most current version is. And then I've also built some other activities that connect into some of the other science topics and just some other general things that I've come along the way. So I have a site set up where I've got all of these slides and links to my sample activities. I have a studio in Scratch called Mrs. D's Scratchtivities. I do have a link to my website a little bit further along, but in all that, there is a set of cards for Scratch specifically. You can use these yourself. Also share them with students. They give an overview of the whole interface. So whether you're familiar with Scratch or some other coding, or you're totally new to this block-based coding, these slides break down the Scratch interface specifically, but they would also teach you about basically any other block-based coding program. Oftentimes the colors are really similar and they work in really similar ways. So this is a great place to start, just to get sort of familiar with the overall block-based programming languages and how they work. On the Scratch site, if you want to have your students go ahead and start making those things in Scratch, they have tutorials that teach you the whole interface. If your students work through, they start on the Ideas tab, and then there's tutorials there aimed at differing ability levels, different interests, to hopefully get them, inspired in building. They can follow some of those tutorials, and then you can have them create something for one of your other topics or a concept that they're learning, and they would be using the block-based model. They would be meeting this computer science skill and procedure, but they would also be showing you what they know about some other topic, which that's the best thing, would be to be building something that has a purpose. So if the purpose is to show about the digestive system, we can check that box off in that science unit. If they successfully complete this, we can check off that they have built that computer artifact and use some block-based coding. So again, I would encourage you to give your students as many chances as you can to do block-based coding. This is going to hopefully get some of them excited about maybe being computer engineers, and then again, just give them some foundational skills that we know will be helpful to them no matter what they choose in their futures. On my site, etwithmrsd.com, you'll find some instructions and examples that look like this. I have all of the slideshows are broken down to show each of the algorithms that need to be put in. The step-by-step add these sprites. So they're a great starting place for your students to learn about the Scratch program, so that then they could go on their own and create something truly from scratch. In Scratch. If you haven't already checked out code.org, they have a huge curriculum. It starts as low as pre-reader. So again, you can have your students head right over there. They can start working through these tutorials or start working through the computer science curriculum. You have the options for these to assign things out into Google Classroom, assign within the code.org environment and ask your students to complete things in a particular order or to work through a section of the curriculum. They have lots of hour of code activities if you're just looking for some things for them to get in there and get familiar and just play around with the coding. And as I say, lots of lessons too. So tons of content, self-guided tutorials. You don't have to know anything to get your students on there in coding. If your students have already done coding or you have been doing it with them and you're all familiar and you haven't checked out Google CS First, these are some, again, it's curriculum. The lessons are self-guided. Your students can just work their way through, but these are going to have them doing some bigger level projects. So they could be doing, like a literacy thing, some type of a writing project, and building that through code as well. And then a one-off that is the opposite of the others. This is a great site that you could post for your fast finishers if you have a spot in your Google Classroom with links to places that they're allowed to go when they're not specifically have work that they need to be doing. Blockly.games are just a handful of coding games. They stand alone, just click them and go. So no accounts needed. Your students can just go on here and work through the different challenges, see if they can beat their own high scores and practice some block-based coding in another way. Outside of using Chromebooks, toys, STEM toys, robotics toys are a really great way for your students to create those computational artifacts, build some block-based programming language. So not all robot toys have a block-based language, but many do. If you're not already familiar with the ATA Library Maker Kits, I suggest you check them out. You can borrow some maker kits from the ATA. They'll ship them out to you. You can ship them back. It doesn't cost you anything. And it's a great way to try some toys or some robotics out before you commit to purchasing. If you do want to purchase some robotics, I highly recommend Microbits and also Sphero Minis. I see my image isn't loading here for me. The Sphero Minis and the Microbits both have block-based programming languages that can be done on Chromebooks or computers, and looks a lot like the Scratch blocks, just with different commands in them that are particular to those robotics. With just a microbit and a Chromebook, your students can make some really cool things, and same as with the Spheros. So that is an overview of the grade 6 computer science curriculum. I hope you feel comfortable to go out and cover this with your students and have some fun while you're doing that. Thank you.